Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by producer JL, John-Luc Shapiro. So good to talk to you again, my friend, as we dig into another perplexing week of Rangers hockey. The team sitting at 6-6-2 as we record this on Thursday night, heading into the back-to-back weekend in Detroit, home for the Islanders. They cannot win at home. They are nearly flawless on the road. Up is down, left is right. How are you, JL?
I'm doing all right. I am what the term that I made. I don't know if this is a term that someone else had made up, but I feel like I made this up. Maybe I didn't, but I am confuzzled, confused and
Yeah.
puzzled at the same time. They
Yes.
look like these rapscallions on the road where they're absolutely killing it, and then they come to Madison Square Garden and they just cannot seem to get out of their own way. But I'm doing all right. How are you doing, my friend? It's always a pleasure to be here.
Doing great. Just really excited to be in the midst of hockey season now. Um,
Hmm.
as much and I love the warm weather and I'm a big baseball fan and longer days and the summer's just can, it's fun. But I also do like this time of year. I get a little tired of winter after the holidays, but
Hmm.
I was in New York City this week. It's not quite in Christmas mode, but you start to get that vibe around the city,
Hmm.
which is just such a great place to be in the fall and winter, early part of winter, before all the horrible weather pounds you for 4 months straight. So no, and look, I mean, I really, you said confuzzled. I'm saying perplexing. Um, I'm still though remaining. I'll say like very, very almost defiantly optimistic about this team. I really
Hmm.
do feel mostly good about the direction things are going. I cannot understand why they can't get a freaking puck to go in the net at home. It certainly started to look like a confidence issue in the second half of the Carolina game. Obviously, they came out flying, should have had 2 goals at least in the first period. And then when that didn't happen, it seemed like things snowballed a little bit. And the um, resilience that they've showed on the road, because they did, that road trip was they had an amazing Western Canada and Pacific Northwest road trip. They go 3-1, couple of overtime wins. Um, we're in some tight games and we're able to prevail and we're able to really show something to themselves and to the fans that like, hey, this team could be for real, but then they just can't seem to replicate that at home. So um I think it's probably best to start with the Carolina game, then we'll get into some of the lineup changes that we saw during the day on Thursday. Obviously practice before they flew out to Detroit. Excuse me. um but I guess, what do you think the difference is, JL? I don't think there's a right answer here, but the home Rangers versus the road Rangers, what do you think the difference is?
No, that's kind of tough to figure out because I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just because they're a little bit more comfortable when they're home. You sleep in your own bed, yada yada yada, or whatever. Or I think honestly it's just a mind game. Because I think that if opening night had gone a bit differently, and I think if the game against Washington and Edmonton had gone a bit differently, where a couple of goals go in the back of the net, I really think we wouldn't be having this conversation because you said it yourself. I'm in the same boat as you. I am very aggressively optimistic about this team because the underlying numbers of how they're playing in terms of even strength and 5-on-5 are simply just they're good, but it's sort of an anomaly because the puck's not going into the back of the net. Generally speaking, if you have really good 5-on-5 numbers and you're putting as much pressure as you are in terms of offensive time and zone entries and all that, then you would expect the puck to go in. And they're also playing very well defensively, just as a unit in general. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint. I guess maybe it probably is sort of a confidence mental thing now because when they're on the road, they look way more relaxed. They're following the system a bit more. They don't look as jumbled up. They're just playing simple hockey, but when they're at home, I think they realize that they haven't really done much at home. So it tends to get a bit extra when it comes to them trying to do a little more. And then since it doesn't go in, they just kind of press on their sticks a little too much. And you could see that in the Carolina game. They were really buzzing for basically the first half of that game. And, Carolina is a very, conservative type team where they're not going to score a million goals a game. So the Rangers had every opportunity to seize it, but, Carolina being a very strong defensive unit was able to snuff it out. And I guess one of the issues with them being at home than on the road is that there's not many second chances in the offensive zone. And I know Dave pointed this out to us. I don't know whether if it was on a post or in one of our chats, is that they're kind of stationary when they're in the offensive zone at home and sometimes on the power play, which it's been largely ineffective for, most of the season so far. But again, there are players who are shooting at career lows. And obviously, once Sullivan's system tends to seep in a little bit more in terms of the comfortability factor, I really think that that's going to change because I don't think Artemi Panarin or Alexei Lafreniere are going to shoot under 10%. I think and then also obviously Vincent Trocheck not being around really actually is affecting this team negatively because he does, as people may want to chide him in certain ways, I really think he's still very effective for this team and he does a lot in terms of just kind of balancing out the lineup a little bit. So it is, puzzling. It is definitely puzzling to see them just not score. They're definitely playing a lot tighter at home. So it definitely is a mental thing because they're really not straying too far from what they've done on the road. They are just a little bit more, the term is tight. They're just a
Yeah, yeah.
little tight at home. And you could tell like it kind of wears them down a little bit, but you just hope that that changes as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think also the point you made about the just the unlucky results in the earlier games. It was a great one because it was the Washington game and what was the other one you mentioned? They got
Edmonton.
by Edmonton. Yeah,
Yes.
those two games in particular, they pretty much dominated them start to finish. They definitely have not played perfect hockey at home. Opening night was a dud. They had a horrible defensive game against San Jose where they really got back into old habits like pre Mike Sullivan habits where it became a total track meet and there were San Jose players wide open in the slot all night. Obviously, Macklin Celebrini has a hat trick in that game. So 5 of the 6 goals they've scored at home are in that game, but of course that's a loss as well. But those 2 games in particular, they played more than well enough to win. And I think you're right. If they just get results there, none of this conversation is happening. None of the frustration comes to the surface and the fans don't start booing. And look, I'm not one of these people who is like anti-booing. I tickets are enough money. If you don't feel happy with the product on the ice, or if you're pissed off at a player or a group of players for whatever reason, it's your right to boo. Like I have no problem with
Mhm.
that. What I will say is I think it's a little reductive to boo a team that is very clearly playing as hard as they possibly can and just not getting
Right.
any results.
Yeah,
Like
this is not last season. Yeah.
this is not last season. This is not the dark ages of, the early Glenn Sather, John Muckler, Ron Lowe, like those teams, which like a bunch of overpaid, overpriced veteran guys who were in the wrong roles and just didn't give a shit and mailed most of the games in. This is not that. This team is structured, sound defensively, all those things we talked about, and they play really hard. And they're hard to play against. That's the other thing that
Mhm.
we've heard them want to be this for years, right? We got to be harder to play against. They
Mhm.
finally are. And so I understand the frustration as a fan, and they're down 2-0 at the end of 2 periods, and everybody's booing. But in my head, and I'm sitting at home, I'm not there, so right, I didn't spend the money or take the time to travel into the Garden, and everybody knows how expensive it is and how time consuming it is, and how bad the trains are and how bad the traffic is. All those things, right, that make these games not always the most enjoyable thing to go to, at least in terms of the logistics. And you want to see some goals. And Igor said as much, right? And I think all the players would agree, like, oh yeah, like total fans, like they pay to see goals. We need to score goals for them.
Mhm.
But that was not like a boo worthy effort to me. They had outplayed Carolina through most of the first 2 periods. Game should have been at worst 2-2. And what I'm continuing to focus on, and this is why I said earlier that I'm optimistic, every game against Carolina over the last however many years, 7 seasons, has been decidedly in Carolina's favor in terms of the shot and scoring chance battle. I know the Rangers have beaten them in the playoffs twice. Again, I think that they had some really entertaining and exciting games against Carolina. It never was a bad matchup for the Rangers in terms of being able to win the game, but they could never get on even footing 5-on-5 against that team. That was not the case on Tuesday night. They were the better team 5-on-5 for most of the first two periods. Carolina, as you said, totally locked it down in the third. Rangers only got one shot on goal, though I think the scorekeeping in MSG was a little suspect in that regard. I think I saw at least two shots on goal. Not that that matters. It's not enough. They didn't have enough offensive zone time. They didn't generate any real scoring chances. They had a bad period, and they were pressing and lacking confidence at that point. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's excuse me, it is really it's annoying and it's puzzling, but I don't think it's, I don't know that booing is the appropriate response. Now the question is, how do you what is the next adjustment, right? The other big issue here, JL, that we should cover before we get to the adjustments we saw in practice, the power play is a problem. Hasn't been for a long time, as we've discussed here. They had an elite power play for multiple seasons with the same personnel, roughly running the same plays and formations and sets. Obviously, they don't have Chris Kreider this year, but you still have all the talent with Fox, Panarin, Zibanejad, etc., and they can't score a goal. So the power play is a major issue for sure. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I just think that they just need to move around a little bit more, as simple as it is. I know, like I said before, and I know Dave mentioned it, is they're too stationary.
Yeah, it's
And I really think that they really need to sort of just kind of, they did one of the things by putting Will Cooley out there. He seems to be a little bit tougher in front of the net. And this is no knock on Alexis Lafreniere, but I mean, somebody has to tell him just to be, fearless and just shoot the puck. I've noticed plenty of times, especially in the games that I've gone to, and you and I have very similar seats in a very similar section of the Garden. So, where we sit in the 400 section, you get the Rangers shooting at you twice.
Yeah, you're right behind the
So
goal.
you're right behind the goal, right on top of, essentially if there's a power play, you're right on top.
Yep.
And when you see Lafreniere get the puck, like, he's fine every other time on the ice when he's skating down the wing. Like, he's actually been one of the better players. Like I said, it just hasn't gone in. But on the power play, though, you would think that with a little more room, he would be a little bit more active, but he just kind of stays there.
Yep.
And notice that when, JT Miller just watching JT Miller in person, it's such a relief to see somebody like that who is constantly moving. He's really the only one that's kind of moving around.
Yeah.
Zibanejad is really only on the perimeter of the ice. And then same with Panarin. Panarin is just kind of on the perimeter, just sort of hanging around. No one's kind of really taking it, but
Yep.
whenever they get the chance to try and take it, it's either getting blocked or they pass it, right?
Yep.
So it just kind of seems like they're gripping again. It's just part of gripping their sticks too hard, and they just need to move around a little more. That's it. They just need to move around a little bit more. And Lafreniere needs to shoot it on the power play more, because I'm telling you, it. He kind of is getting into the territory of how I felt with Kevin Hayes, except I don't dislike him as much. Because
Yeah.
if anyone knows me, knows that I really didn't like Kevin Hayes after a while, because he has this huge frame. He can use his body for certain things, but never did it. He also has a phenomenal shot. Alexis Lafreniere has probably one of the best wrist shots I've ever seen, but you would never know it because he doesn't do it on the power play.
Yeah, he's very indecisive, I think, is what it is. Yeah, he just and you can't, even with the extra time and space on a power play, you can't be indecisive. You've got to get it off your stick quick. And I agree, he's indecisive.
Right. And so, I remember I went to a game in 21 in his first season, and he was he almost scored a goal against the Sabres this one game. And I'm telling you, the way he fired that puck at the net, I don't think I've ever seen or heard a Ranger shoot a puck that hard in a long time. And he has a weapon there, but it's just the indecisiveness. It's what's killing them. And Panarin can be on the perimeter, whatever. He's kind of become a non-factor at some point. Zibanejad is okay in what he does. Miller's doing what he does. Fox is controlling the point. So somebody has to fire it on there. Somebody has to either stand in front, screen the goalie, or fire it on net, regardless of whether there's a screen or not. Mix things up a little bit. Teams know that they're going to pass it. They need to move around more. They need to pass it, in the right areas and just kind of make just better decisions in the offensive zone.
Yeah, and so they did adjust the personnel as we've been alluding to, and we can get to some of those changes now. So on the power play, Lafreniere drops down to the second unit. Will Cooley moves up to the first unit. He is definitely will be more of a consistent net front presence, a la Chris Kreider. Whereas I think, as you were saying, JL, like Lafreniere was there, but then he would pop out to the kind of that off wing. I don't think it makes sense to have JT Miller in that position. He's too good of a passer. He has to touch the puck. And then the other three guys are hanging out on the perimeter. Panarin, Zibanejad, and obviously Fox are not going to do anything in front of the net. So Cooley becomes the new Kreider. And look, obviously Chris Kreider became the single best net front player in the net front player and net front goal. The hope is that you could score some easier goals, just like Carolina did with Nick Ehlers, right? Who didn't have a goal in his first 10 or 11 games as a Hurricane. And his first it's a really nice shot, but it's through a massive screen. I think it was Seth Jarvis in front. Shesterkin never saw the shot. It went off the, the far post and in. But it's like, that's a shot that if he sees it, he's going to save it, 99 times out of 100. That goal happens because of the screen. Same thing with their second goal off of faceoff. That wasn't a power play goal, but same thing. A lot of traffic in front. Puck makes it through a maze of bodies and in. The Rangers aren't getting screen luck right now, for sure. Like when they do have good screens set up, the puck's either not getting through or it's hitting the goalie, but they're not screening the goalie effectively enough on the power play. So I think the idea with Cooley is that they will do that to a much more effective degree with him.
Right. And I know that in the offseason, Mike Sullivan was asked, this is Dan Rosen from NHL.com. Dan Rosen asked, or basically it was part of his article that they were asking Mike Sullivan, who would you see replacing Chris Kreider's production? And he mentioned Will Cooley. And in the times that Zibanejad and Cooley played together, you can see that there is some sort of chemistry there, because there are, Kreider and Cooley do have very similar play styles,
Yeah, they do.
although Kreider is probably, was a better overall athlete, but Cooley is probably the better skater. So if Cooley can, replicate something similar to what Kreider can do, at least 50%, then I think you see results. And even so, once Vincent Trocheck comes back, you have to possibly think about putting Cooley, Miller, and Zibanejad on a line together again, because that line seems to do pretty well, and I think that would help balance out the roster.
Yeah. So in terms of the five on, the main lines, the four lines that we probably will see in the Detroit game, and then if that game goes well, the Islander game on Saturday, Panarin, Zibanejad, Radish. So Radish gets back into the top six. Cooley, Miller, Lafreniere, Shiri, Laba, Brodzinski, Parsonen, Carrick, and Yaroslav Hemwash will likely make his NHL debut. Adam Edstrom will probably be a healthy scratch. The fourth line has not been as productive since Matt Rempe went out of the lineup. It's pretty clear that he has become somewhat of a play driver. We don't know how consistent that would have been or will be over a longer sample, but he certainly was the engine that made that line go. And obviously Sam Carrick had some games where, he was very involved and productive as well. But, ultimately I don't love Taylor Radish in the top six, but clearly they want to go with the center depth again, right? Splitting up Zibanejad and Miller, not loading up that top line and going for a little bit more balance throughout the four lines after trying the, loaded top line thing for, a game and a half, 2 games. The other potential change that looks like Connor Mackey will make his season debut and looks like Matthew Robertson will probably sit again. Excuse me. Again, I don't love that because I think we know what Mackey is, and he's kind of a, physical 7th, 8th defenseman type. I don't know that plays well against Detroit, particularly, who's like a fast kind of like high flying, like up and down team. But I guess they didn't like Robertson's game against Carolina, and looks like he's going to sit for Mackey. So we'll see how that pans out. But any thoughts on that lineup, and what are you expecting, if you know anything at all about Hemlosh, which what a miss to not get a chance to hear Sam Rosen say that name. By
I
the way,
know. I know.
um, what are you expecting from him? What do you like or not like about that lineup?
Well, I'm a little disappointed that Edstrom is getting scratched, but I guess there's a reason for everything. I didn't think Edstrom was that bad the other day, but I guess everybody's got to get their due at some point. I would have preferred either, Parson or Brodzinski, but Brodzinski's actually been really good. This also just kind of tells you that Noah Laba's here to stay.
Oh yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
he probably would have been the logical one if he hadn't been playing as
I
well,
think
but
he's.
Laba's been
I think you can make the case he's been their third best forward. I think you
100%.
could. Yeah, I think it's Miller's advantage at Laba, the three centers.
Yeah,
Lafreniere's
absolutely.
up there too. Lafreniere, by the way, I wanted to drop this in. Um, a friend of mine sent this stat in a group text earlier today. I believe it's high danger chances. Let me look at it. But Lafreniere leads the team in this category.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, high danger chances. Sorry about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Lafreniere leads the team in high danger chances for percentage or high danger chances. With him on the ice, the Rangers have 49 high danger chances for and over only 17 against, which is just a ridiculous disparity.
Especially
Most guys are
considering the puck's not going to the net.
exactly well, right. I mean, and again, those are on ice statistics. So he doesn't have 49 individual high danger chances, but he should have something in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 goals by this point. And he only has what, two
Mhm.
or one or two.
Just
Um,
about, I
yeah,
think.
and but just they've been so good with him on the ice. Whatever line he's been has been in the offensive zone creating chances. So no, I did want to mention that, but certainly back to your point about Laba, like yes, he has been one of the 3 or 4 best forwards this year for the Rangers. He's been fantastic.
Oh yeah, he's definitely been a revelation. I think with Laba playing well with who was it, Cooley and Lafreniere, I think that once Trocheck comes back, that could potentially be a line with
Yeah,
Trocheck taking the second line center, or maybe Trocheck even going on a third line and anchoring some of that. But just overall, with some of these changes, you know, uh, I'm not really gonna sit here and say that I'm excited that Taylor Radish is gonna be on the first line, but I mean, at the same time, though, I mean, currently, I know this will change over the course of the season, but I mean, he is one of our top scorers right now, so you kind of want to ride that high, and a good coach always kind of tends to go with the hot hand. So I think with Panarin and Zibanejad, Radish is essentially the driver of that line, which I never would have thought I would have said in the summer. But overall, I mean, I can't get too disappointed in what they're doing because, I understand what Sullivan's trying to do and just trying to feel things out. But also, again, with Vincent Trocheck and also Matt Rempe to a degree, this is not the full lineup 100%. And until Gabe Perreault gets here, and until hopefully something we see in Kemlosh could help that. This is how it's probably going to be for the next couple of weeks unless they really start to hit a stride. In terms of Hemlosh, he's a big boy. I think he's 6'6", 200 something pounds. He's a big body, very similar to Edstrom, very similar play style. I think Hemlosh has a little bit more front end skill, so you would imagine that he is there. I guess they're probably just going to look to see if his style is a bit similar to Edstrom or if he can add a little bit more offensive flair because they're not just going to call him up and then not use him or try to see where he fits. It's different with Brennan Othman where it's like, all right, well, you kind of know what you're expecting with Othman, and it all depends on whether he decides to hit that mark or not. But with Hemlosh, it seems to be sort of this unidentified ceiling that maybe he could hit playing in the pro environment. It happened with Edstrom. It's definitely happened with Rempe.
hmm
So they want to see what they have in him, and I think he might have a good game. I hear a lot of good things about this kid. I know Hope, who writes about the Wolfpack for Blue Sea Blogs. She's very positive about him. She says a lot of good things about just how he plays and his size, and he definitely fits the mold of somebody that would fit in the Mike Sullivan system. So I'm eager to see how he does. Again, and then I can't get mad at Taylor Radish being on line one because it's like they really don't have any other options. I mean, you want Connor Sheary up there again? You know?
Yeah. It balances the line. They're just looking for balance here. It's not again like that. If you wanted one, bona fide scoring line, you would just keep the three, big boys together, Panarin, Miller, and Zibanejad. So, No, I mean, and I like moving Mika back to center. Um, but this just does, the other thing that I think we have to remember here is, and it's always difficult to think of it this way when you're in the beginning of the season, but let's say that they started better record wise and then they lost Trocheck to, this injury, say 20 games in. Say they started this season, I don't know, with 12 or 13 wins out of their first 20 games. We're feeling good. And then Trocheck goes out. And then they go 6-6-2 while he's out. You'd actually be like, okay, that's fine. Like without Vincent Trocheck on this team, like they're probably not much better than 500. Because he is a very important player. I mean, the guy has scored, no fewer than 59 points every year. He is a heart and soul type, but he brings offense, and he's the kind of guy that, can score the greasy goal. And, he's like he's always good for like 2 or 3 like totally bizarre goals every year. Like one that goes off a shin pad. He'll like fan on a shot, but it'll like hit a leg and go off the post and go in. He doesn't always score pretty ones, but they don't need pretty ones right now.
Just gotta go in the back of the net. That's it.
And he's really good for that. And I think they miss that. So, like I said, I'm kind of, I don't look at their record and think, oh my God, like that they're screwed. They're not going to make the playoffs. I understand that Thanksgiving is amazingly fast approaching. I understand that they have, basically the lowest points percentage in the Eastern Conference, but they're a 500 team. There's a bunch of teams that are under 500 in terms of point percentage out West. The East happens to be the stronger conference, at least at this point in the season. And they really just need to tread water until they get fully healthy. And I think until they are comfortable calling up Perreault and really rounding out the lineup. Not that I think he is the key that unlocks everything and turns them into like a bona fide contender, but I just think that like, this whole first couple of months is just about laying the foundation defensively and with their identity and the 5-on-5, style of play where they know that they can and will control most of the games they're in if they stick to their system and their principles. And then if you layer Trocheck on top of that, you layer Gabe Perreault on top of that in the right role, and you start getting a little bit of puck luck, I do think the results will come.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think also too, I think what a lot of people tend to underestimate too is how good Vincent Trocheck is on the power play.
Yes.
And I think having whether he's on the first unit or he's centering the second unit, that's extra depth for you. Because right now on the second unit, Will Cooley's taking faceoffs.
Right.
And Will Cooley is not a natural center. So I think also just in the lineup in general, it just kind of rounds out a little bit. But I think in the power play would help the most because if you really look at it, outside of Chris Kreider, Vincent Trocheck was probably the best person to be in net front in front of the goalie because he's probably was the second best deflector of pucks on the team. He had a lot of goals, like you said, that were dirty in front of the net, that were either deflections off of sticks and this, that, and the fourth. So I think with Trocheck coming back, whether or not they put him on the first or second unit, which I think he might go to the second unit, if anything, which I think would be smart. It allows for them a little bit more wiggle room. And, I think if within the situation of Gabe Perreault, obviously he's looking really good in Hartford right now. You want him to build his confidence, but I think either sometime in December or sometime in January, he might actually be here and he might actually not go back down. Because I think if you put him on a line with, let's say Trocheck and Panarin, or you put him on a line with, Zibanejad and Miller, ideally it would be with those two. I think you have the makings of really a really solid deep lineup. And what could happen too is if you want to with Perreault, if you either want to start him on the second or even third line too, I'm not really a proponent of the third line, but if you want to start him with sort of less pressure, you can slot him on, outside the first line where he can play against lesser defensemen to a degree. And maybe that'll burst his confidence up a little bit. But again, I like I said before to in other podcasts, you have to treat him in the role that he is going to play. That's why Noah Laba's doing so well because Noah Laba's fitting into the depth center role. and he's been nothing but phenomenal. You weren't going to call up Noah Laba, make him a fourth line center. He wasn't going to come in and be your first line center. He is your typical third C, potentially second C, in
Mhm.
certain instances, which we saw over the weekend against Seattle. And with Gabe Perreault, you can't have him start on the third and fourth line. He has to be a top four winger, so a top six winger. So what does that mean? Either Cooley or Lafreniere has to take the lumps and move down a little bit. But I think though rearranging the deck chairs though would be good for this team because now you have more options.
Yeah, and I do think that you only bring him in A, when you know he's ready, and B, when the rest of the team is humming. And I mean that results wise too, because what you don't want to do is bring him into a situation where you're still struggling to score goals, and then he feels like it's kind of on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then the whole fan base is looking to him, and it's like, well, all right, nobody else on this team can score, so I guess it's Gabe Perreault, that it's him or
Mm-hmm.
bust. You don't really want that. So I do think it's important that they start to get results, win a few home games, which they will. They're not going to go over the season at home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you can kind of add him as like, not the final piece, but kind of like he is the last puzzle piece until the trade deadline, right? Then you see where you are going to the trade deadline. And, that's where you can also meaningfully, make a move that maybe sets you up to make a run of the playoffs. So no, look, I
Mm-hmm.
think, my main three words here, and I've been pretty steadfast with this every time I watch the team, especially through, most of these games where they've been the better team and just haven't been able to pull it out. Stay the course, keep doing what you're doing. Don't give in to the temptation to change your game and change your plan because you're not getting results right now. This is not a Stanley Cup or bust year. Mike Sullivan is in this for the long haul. JT Miller's in this for the long haul. I know these guys aren't getting any younger, but you're seeing with Laba, you're seeing with Matthew Robertson, you've got some younger guys in the fold here that, it does seem like Chris Drury's had some decent drafts. Brennan Hoffman notwithstanding. And you've got young players and you've got a lot of cap flexibility where you can add good young pieces to this older core, take a few shots in the next few years at the Stanley Cup with the older guys, and then hopefully have it be sustained after that. But, point being, and I think, Elliot Friedman, I think, and we know this, so this is not like a revelation coming from, a guy like Elliot, but, he reported about the Panarin thing and blah, blah, blah. But he was also like, there's no rebuild coming for the Rangers. And like, well, of course there isn't. Like, and why would there be? Like, I understand that they're not in a good place in terms of the standings, but they're also the second best team in terms of 5-on-5 play in hockey. And it's pretty, you know, um, common knowledge at this point that when you are that good 5-on-5, eventually your results start to regress towards the mean a little bit. So it does feel like a long wait for that to happen. I feel like a lot of us believe it already should have happened, but it's a long season. They're only 14 games in, and let's see, let's see how things pan out, starting with this weekend against Detroit and the Islanders. So, all right, let's get to the questions. Got a few on the blog, a couple on Blue Sky. JL is going to read them. We'll both answer and react to them. So, over to you, JL.
All right. So first of all, thank you to everyone who submitted questions either on socials or on the blog. Like I would say, we appreciate your input and we appreciate your feedback. So I'll start on Blue Sky here. This comes from DSAM at DSAM1921. And DSAM asks us, given that the team is approaching the 15 game mark and Thanksgiving for the most part is the day the league starts to get an idea of who the playoff teams will be, how much longer do you think the team still needs to be well adjusted enough for a turnaround, or do you even see that happening anymore?
I think they just got to, and we just, kind of is a natural segue or a continuation of my last point before we jump to the questions. Stay the course. There are no major changes needed here. Yes, they need to score more goals. As you alluded to earlier, JL, most of their top players are shooting well below their career averages. Sure, their finishing ability may be a little bit, they may be a little past their prime in terms of that regard, right? Miller, Panarin, Zibanejad are all on the other side of 30. We do know that production does tend to decline in, slowly at first in the early 30s. Then there's usually a more precipitous drop off in the mid 30s. But um, I again, defiantly optimistic, JL. Like I still think this is a playoff team. I think they're going to rip off a big winning streak at some point within the next, let's say, 6 weeks before the Olympic break. The conference is very tightly packed. I don't think it's worth looking at the standings and be like, oh, well, we're in 13th place here and it's November 6th. Like, they're 2 points out of a playoff spot. So everybody just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And the Rangers need to stay the course.
Right. No, I more than you pretty much kind of took a lot of what I was going to say. I agree with that. And I think also too, I think what we have to do is just kind of put things in, excuse me, perspective a little bit. One of the big things that this team had an issue with last season was just overall effort.
Yes.
There was a big problem with this team and the players on the team in general where they just weren't trying enough. Last season could have gone a lot differently if they had just been able to just play as a team a little bit more, and they probably would have eked out a couple more wins, and then we probably would have seen them in the playoffs. As toxic as that team was, all they had to do was play as a team, and they didn't. There was a lot of effort, not effort. Excuse me. There was a lot of talent on that team last season, and it's just because they were basically checked out. But you look at the way that they played then and look at the way that they played now. I could understand the frustration a little bit. Not to say that, being 500 isn't frustrating, because, I think the frustrating part is that they're playing so well and nothing is going in. But again, regression to the mean at some point. But I think that's where a lot of the reaction comes from. But I don't think is really much to worry about, because honestly, things have to even out at the end of the day. Unless something drastic happens, things even out. They just do. And like you said, it's going to be, this is going to be released in November 7th. You still have a bunch of hockey left. There's also the Olympic break. And I like to use the Stanley Cup winning St. Louis Blues from 2017, 2018, I think, around that time.
Yep.
They were in the same situation, basically dead in the water in January.
They were in
Now I
last.
know they were in last place, and they were able to come back, not only make the playoffs, but obviously win the Stanley Cup. So if you look at just where the team is at right now, watching them play, it's not a question of effort, and it's really not a question of personnel, truth be told. We have us as fans, granted they're not as good as they were before because of regression with age, but I think what us as fans tend to do is we tend to be harder on our own players more than other teams,
Yeah.
which, rightly so, because we're a little bit more, we expect a lot, all things considered. That's fair as a fan, but you also have to put it in perspective. This team has a ton of talent. They're just underperforming to a degree. There are other teams who are way worse and in worse situations than the Rangers are. So, unless something drastic happens, this team is going to be competitive enough to keep their names in a hunt. And like you said, I think they pull off a winning streak, and I think they make the playoffs. So, I think I think it's just with the adjustment of a new system, it's really taking some players more time to adjust and some players less time to adjust. Seems like Panarin is adjusting a little bit long, trying to adjust a little bit more than, let's say, JT Miller, because JT Miller is more fit for this style of system. Vincent Trocheck will probably fit a lot better in this system. Noah Laba's doing pretty well in this system, but Alexis Lafreniere is still trying to get used to it. So I think the more they play, the more they get comfortable. They're going to win at home, and it's just going to click. They don't look like they're a team that's just going to fall apart. And I know a lot of us are scared about that. Unless something crazy and drastic happens, I think what you said is correct.
Yeah, totally. And I think Sullivan's too good a coach to let that happen too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, next question on Blue Sky. This comes from Michael Silvers at Elm Silvers 1979, and Michael asks, "I got one. If not Lafreniere, who looks to have been taken off power play one today? Who would you take off instead? You can only choose one."
Um, it's an interesting question. I would probably say Panarin because he has struggled. But I also think what I would do, and this is a little bit of a larger response than what the question is calling for, I would balance the units and I would give each unit a minute of the power play. Again, unless the whoever goes out first is, totally dominating and still in the offensive zone. Um, I would balance the units. I would split up Fox and Panarin because they are both natural kind of like quarterback types.
Mhm.
Um, I would split up let's say Zibanejad and Miller. I would have and then whatever you just kind of go down the list of players that are remaining on the power play. Laba, Cooley, Lafreniere, Rempe, obviously we saw when he was healthy. Trocheck will be on the power play when he's back. The second unit doesn't have a quarterback. Braden Schneider is not a power play quarterback. Now, oddly enough, that unit does often come up with some chances. It's usually not pretty. It's usually one pass and a shot, but there's nothing wrong with that. But excuse me, I would add a little bit more skill to the second unit, and I would basically rotate. I would say, all right, unit 1 is starting this power play, unit 2 starting the next power play. So, and frankly, like, I don't think we are far from needing to consider that option because, look, they can say all they want about the looks that they've generated, and they have generated a ton. The power play needs to score. I'm happy to get on this podcast every week and be bullish and optimistic on the Rangers. They're probably not going anywhere with the league's worst power play. It won't happen. You cannot win enough games without power play goals, and they've got to fix it. So if they don't start getting results with kind of like the slightly tweaked top unit, which we know is going to get 75% of the ice time, they probably need to do a more drastic full split of the top 5 or 6 guys and go from there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. To answer Michael's question, my choice would have been to move Lafreniere. That would have been my choice. I think outside of that, I think, yeah, Panarin would have either been my choice or maybe even Zibanejad to a degree.
Right. That's the other one
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah, because then he could take faceoffs. Miller is a natural center, so Miller could take faceoffs on the first unit and then just add, kind of flip-flop around there. But, I think the only time that I thought that somebody actually did something right with the power play units, and I'm hoping Mike Sullivan can do something like this soon enough, was Gerard Gallant. When they traded for Patrick Kane and they had Vladimir Tarasenko, there was so many bodies to fit on power play one, you just couldn't fit everybody. Kreider, Panarin, Zibanejad, Fox, Trocheck, you
Yeah.
know, and then what are you going to do with Tarasenko and Kane? So, you know, Kane, I think, was on the first unit. And I think like either Trocheck and Tarasenko were on the second unit. And
Yeah, I think they were. Yeah. Yes. That's
they
good.
looked good. They looked really good. And I think like Kako and Cooley or maybe not Cooley, but Kako and Lafreniere with like Trocheck and Tarasenko. I thought that was phenomenal and it looked good. But then Gerard Gallant changed it and then just never went back to it. So I'm hoping that they can get back to that because especially when Trocheck comes back, I think that would benefit them significantly. And also they won't look as ragged and tired out there.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, JL. And you're right. That's actually a really good callback to the Gallant era. No, there was, look, he was not a great coach, but I think there were a few things, I think first of all, he had Zibanejad playing the best hockey of his life. Zibanejad
Hmm.
really responded to him and was playing really, really well under Gallant. Um,
Hmm.
he did not have a very well developed roster, especially that second year. The Kane trade was a square peg in a round hole. We don't need to relitigate that, but certainly, yeah. Look, it does take some courage to split up the units. And look, David Quinn runs this power play. I don't want to really get into a long discussion about David Quinn and the fact that he's on this coaching staff. My thing on assistant coaches. I don't think they matter very much in the grand scheme of things, but um, look, there's egos to serve here. Those guys that are on the top power play unit have been there for years, and they kind of expect it at this point, right? Other than Lafreniere, that was the easy move to take him off and try Cooley.
Hmm.
It would be a little bit more of a seismic shift to like split the unit up completely and even out the power play time. But I really think give this configuration a few games. Maybe Trocheck's back in a week. Give the top unit with him on, on it a week or so. But if they're still bottom of the barrel in the NHL, they've got to make more drastic changes.
Hmm. I agree. All right. So now we go to the blog, and we've got a couple of questions on here. So thank you again, guys, again for sharing your stuff on Blue Sky and also on the blog. I've noticed that sometimes on the blog there's some funny conversation within the questions.
Yeah, we
So
get a lot of conversation. Yeah.
so we also appreciate that. So first question comes from NYC Crash, and they ask, "What is this team going to do not to suck anymore?" Well, I mean,
Uh,
they're not really sucking. It just
No. Score goals, obviously.
That's it.
Winning
Really?
cures all. Truly, like if
Yes.
they and hopefully that first win at home leads to an avalanche, and it just
Yes.
that's what the breaks the the doors down. So, but they need that one for confidence for the fans' sanity. It is sorely needed, and I
Yeah.
think they're going to get it against the Islanders. I'll say that I'm predicting that right now. I think they're going to beat the
Yes.
Islanders on Saturday.
And please just do it when I'm there too. I'm so tired of going to Madison Square Garden and them dropping a dud.
Yeah, not
You
singing
know,
the goal song.
I mean, the San Jose game was nice. I got to sing it. I got to sing the goal song a few times and see a Taylor Radish hat trick, but I was kind of hoping I'd walk out of there with a win, you
Yeah,
know.
you'll take the
So
win. You'll take the win and not the Taylor Radish hat trick for sure.
listen, give me whatever, man. I just wanted to hear the victory song for once. All right, so that's a pretty simple question. Goals will cure winning and cures all. This next question comes from Captain Jack, and Captain Jack asks, if Dolan came out tomorrow, fired Drury, and then said, "We are gutting everything and starting over," would you be mad? Would anybody be mad? This organization needs a quote unquote team builder. What do you guys think of Scott White, assistant GM in Dallas for GM? Like Bill Zito, White has had previous successes in building a winner in the AHL. There are currently a few GMs having NHL success that served as their AHL's team's affiliate GM and had a measure of success in the American Hockey League. Are the Rangers too good for this route?
So my initial reaction was I would be mad because I actually feel like they're on the right track. But I appreciate the wider context there. Look, I'm not gonna sit up here and say, Chris Drury is a great general manager. I don't think he is the abject disaster that everybody else thinks he is. Um, I pretty much totally agree with what he did in taking apart the previous version of this team. I think they got as far as they could go. And
Mhm.
I think, and I think that that's debatable, and people can have their own opinions about that. But he did what he had to do to move on from that core of players. And you know what? Like, I'll take JT Miller's leadership over Jacob Truba's. Um, I think Zibanejad being away from Kreider has freed him up a little bit to just play his game a little bit more. Um, Adam Fox certainly looks rejuvenated, although I think he would have been fine, regardless of that activity. Um, it did clear the space for some draft picks to get into the lineup, like Noah Laba.
Mhm.
That said, I do think that Drury is more of the um, what's the name of Vegas's GM? Or I guess he's the president of hockey operations now. But like Vegas hasn't made a draft pick, like a first round draft pick, like in their history. They just always trade them for star players. And I do think that Chris Drury is more in that mold where he is always going to pursue star players, try to keep the star players and give out the high price contracts. Look, that salary cap space that looms on the horizon for next offseason is a real thing that is going to be utilized regardless of the free agent landscape because he'll make a trade and he will bring in a high price player. I don't think Panarin's back for anything other than like a slight discount on his current deal. So to the point about like they need a team builder, that's another way to do it, right? Where you really go, um, through the draft and kind of the way that Dallas is built. Now, look, I understand what you're saying, the Bill Zito comparison where he was in the AHL, now he's in the NHL. But Bill Zito, that team was not built through the draft. I mean, this is one of the famous things about the Florida Panthers. They have they have 2 first round picks, Ekblad and Barkov. Well, I guess Lundell but he was a first round pick at Dallas, I believe. And maybe he wasn't, but regardless, they don't have a lot of their own draft picks in their lineup. They went out and made trades and made smart free agent signings. They gave Sergei Bobrovsky a big contract. Like this was not a team building thing. Like, and they also like they kind of got they had to involuntarily fire Joel Quenneville and kind of like landed ass backwards into the perfect coach for that team in Paul Maurice. So this whole after the failed Andrew Brunette year, by the way, when everybody thought Andrew Brunette was like the next genius coach to come in, through the ranks in the NHL. So look, I hate to say it this way, but like this isn't the result of some like grand master Bill Zito plan. Like it just came together, and he made some really smart trades. Reinhart, Bennett, everybody knows about those. But look, guys, they're like a couple of bounces from not having any Stanley Cups too. Like that's the way hockey is,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
that's why you can't just dismiss Chris Drury's two Eastern Conference final appearing teams. You can't.
Yeah.
I know people want to, but you can't. It's very hard to get there. The Rangers got there twice. They were very close to making the Stanley Cup final in 2024. It didn't work out, and I think everybody knew that core wasn't going to do it. That just did not have it. And last year proved that, and proved it in a very stark way. And Drury did what he had to do. He tore the team down, and now he's in the process of building it back up. But I think they're in a competitive spot. He's trying to do what Bill Zito did trade wise too, right? Bringing in Will Borgen, looking for the next, um, you know, uh, opportunity. He's definitely looking for the next like Reinhart or Bennett type. Obviously, the JT Miller trade is kind of that type of move on a larger scale, importing that type of attitude and style. So, um, look, I understand the nature of the question. I don't think it would be a smart move to now, right after hiring Mike Sullivan and like having the team playing a good, solid, fundamental, foundational playoff style of hockey that will lead to success if you stick with it. Now is not the time to fire the general manager.
No, I definitely agree. I don't, Chris Drury, there is some things that he's done that, weren't exactly great. But the thing that I'll give Chris Drury credit for is the fact that he does learn from his mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at what happened in this offseason in general, you know, one off season ago, he is putting players on blast, and he and I guess to a degree, I guess the optics or the way that he went about it wasn't great, but I mean, he did have a point because this team had some really obvious flaws, and they knew that the way the team was constructed, even with Peter Laviolette and the fact that they went to the conference final, that the team was very flawed, and so
Yeah,
I can't get on Chris Drury for wanting to change things. This fan base, and this isn't a knock on anybody, this fan base perpetually complains that there's not enough room for the kids, this, that, and the fourth. Do you want to know the reaction this fan base would have if Chris Drury did what Bill Zito did without those draft picks and just traded and signed everybody for money and didn't work out? I mean,
mm-hmm.
like you said, they were a couple of bounces away from not having any Stanley Cups at all. So, a lot of it is luck, but the I wouldn't count, like you said, I wouldn't count Bill Zito in terms of just sort of this builder.
I
He
agree.
was using the assets that were in front of him, and yeah, he's smart to have made the right decisions, But who's to say Chris Drury's not doing that? Again, not my favorite GM, but I'm not going to sit here and say that it's all been bad because Chris Drury's had some pretty good drafts, and he wants to change the way that things are with this organization. For years under Gordon, there was this sort of malaise when it came to doing things. You know, there is no reason to tear this team down, you know? There really isn't because, like I said before, there's still a lot of talent on this team. Yeah, granted, they could probably use one or two guys that could probably, have a little bit more front end skill to put it in the back of the net. But you're also naming like half of the NHL. Not everyone's going to have that guy that could just skate down the wing and shoot. We're technically supposed to have that guy in Panarin, but he's underperforming. So you know, I think if they were to come out and say that they were rebuilding, I would be upset. I would be upset too because with the way the team is currently constructed, and like you said, with the way that Mike Sullivan was brought in here to implement certain things, that kind of defeats the purpose. If you were going to really tear down and build, you would have just kept Dan Muse because Dan Muse
Yeah,
would be able to
exactly.
fit a roster like that better than what Sullivan does. But Sullivan's here for a reason. Drury knows that he has somewhat of enough talent on this team. And like you alluded to before, as the years go on, the cap's going up. A lot of what they have on this team right now is going to be easier to absorb. Better players are going to become available and will end up rounding out the roster a little bit better than what they have now. People were crying about the same thing before when they were stuck with those contracts on the buyout, especially with the Tony DeAngelo contract. But they made the playoffs and did presumably well enough to soak that all in and sponge it rather, and actually do pretty well. Look, you can't. Chris Drury's too, you want to chide him on certain things, fine, but you also have to give him credit for the fact that he did lead this team to 2 conference finals. You could say, oh yeah, maybe that's because that's a lot of what Gorton put together. Yeah, but Chris Drury added to those teams that got them to that point in the first place.
Yeah, and
So,
totally. And now, look, what they're doing now is building a team. They they've got Noah Laba, they've got Gabe Perreault coming. Um, we'll see if one of the other kids pans out. Obviously, Robertson again is not not someone that I think should be glossed over. Obviously, he sat in the organization for a long time. Um, you know, but look, going out and getting Vlad Gavrikov, that's just good identification of a weakness, right? You didn't have a true shutdown
mhm.
defenseman. Trouba was miscast in that role. Keandre Miller was never going to be that. So they went out and took care of that. It's just that's what Drury's trying to do now. And look, for better or worse, to your point, JL, like those teams that made the conference final, especially the 24 team, that team was pretty much a finished product. They got to
Mhm.
that point and they made, whatever those, I can't even remember what the deadline moves were that year. Um, and
The 24 the
it's only
24
2
team
years. Yeah.
against the Panthers, it was Wenberg,
Right. Wenberg and Roslovic.
uh, Wenberg and Roslovic, and I think that was it.
Yeah. So
I
right.
don't
So they
think I
went,
don't think they added a defenseman, but yeah, I think it was just Roslovic and Wenberg. That
right. They
was
went and got Wenberg and Roslovic um, and they had a pretty deep lineup, and they won their first 7 playoff games. By the way, that's
Mhm.
not anything to sneeze at.
Right.
And that team was a finished product, though. And then they got to last year, and everybody knew something was off, and it wasn't going to work, and it was time to move on. So they moved on. This current team is not a finished product, so it's going to take some time, but it's definitely on the right track. So I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, and we should start wrapping
Yeah.
up pretty soon. But
Yeah.
I think, look, if we get another year or two down the line and this thing is very clearly not going to work and they weren't able to replenish the top end of the roster, none of the draft picks look like they're going to pan out, then you could start having conversations about like, okay, it's time to move on from Drury. But you can't do it now, not after you let him hire Mike Sullivan. If you were going to let him
No.
go, you had to do it at the end of last year and bring in a new GM and truly start from scratch. And that's not the
Right.
way Dolan went.
I agree. All right, so we got a couple more questions right before we end the program. So this one comes from Blue Shirts, and Blue Shirts asks, Panarin shaved his head again. Are we about to go on a heater? Yes.
Yes.
That
He's
usually tends
legendary.
to
Yes.
yeah.
He should
I can't.
probably should have been an MVP finalist the year he shaved his head.
I agree, and he probably, if he goes on a heater again, that just might solve a lot of the problems that they're having right now. Honestly,
Yes.
you know. All right, so that's an easy question. So, next thing, this question comes from Two Line Passes, and this one actually got some pretty decent responses, including one from our very own Dave. But you can read those on the blog if you want. Two Line Passes asks, "What's the worst thing you've ever seen a fan do at a game?" Huh? That's a good
I
question.
love that question. I mean, it's pretty like normal, like, oh, like fighting, cursing out opposing fans who aren't acting that bad. Um, I don't have any like vivid memories of like awful fan behavior at a Ranger game. I'd have to go through the memory bank here and see if there's any other sporting events that I've seen stuff, but um, nothing coming to mind for me real right off the top.
So I remember this is probably just it's hockey related because I've been to so many damn baseball games. I've seen my fair share at baseball games, but it's just hockey related. Um, it was Rangers and the Vegas Golden Knights. I think it might have been one of Will Cooley's first games as a Ranger, and they were wearing their the reverse retro blue Liberty jerseys, which remain one
Mhm.
of my favorites of all time. And it was right before the All-Star break that year. I know Vincent Trocheck scored. That's the one thing I remember. I think they won like 5-3 that night. But the one thing I remember was, so obviously when you're at a sporting event, liquor is abundant, right? And
Mhm.
so I was sitting right at the edge of the staircase of the section. It was somewhere in like the 220s, right? Also, I wasn't too far from Dancing Larry, but he wasn't related to this at all. So I am on like the aisle seat, and there obviously these people were drunk. So there was this guy. who was like 3 seats above on the other side, was 3 seats above where I was at. And he is just ranting and raving at this one woman that's sitting like 3 rows in front. The whole night she was on his behind, like just yelling at him for some reason. They were both Ranger fans too, which is the funny part. It's
Yeah.
not like he was a Vegas Golden Knights fan, but they were clearly both inebriated. And I guess they had been bickering and arguing. I wasn't really paying attention because I don't go to Madison Square Garden to watch people fight unless it's a UFC thing, but that's different. But these they're going at it, and she's just like yelling at him. And then all of a sudden she starts dropping the slurs. She dropped the F slur. She dropped the N bomb. She was dropping
Ooh.
all of the R bomb and this and that and the fourth. She was gone. And the guy up top was like, he was still egging her on, but he wasn't really doing anything. He was just talking. So it got to the point where she had to be restrained by her friend who was just as drunk. And she started almost climbing over people, going over the seats. And so all of a sudden, MSG security is on it. They got your face. They probably have your credit card information. Like they know who you
They
are.
do.
They know what your firstborn's going to be. MSG has it on lock. These security guards came running upstairs. It was like linebackers in a football field. They came in and they were like trying to get her to go, and she's like, "No!" And mind you, there's a whole hockey game going on, and this girl was just totally belligerent.
Oh my God.
He's bothering me, and just completely drunk, and I'm enjoying this right as the game is going on. So then it got to the point where they calmed down. This is right at the end of the second period. She calms down and they're like, okay, well, they gave her a warning. But I noticed security was standing like right in front of the entrance because they knew something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, word of advice to everybody: don't think you can be slick at an arena. They can see what you're doing.
No, they know. Yeah.
Somebody is always watching,
They're
right?
very well trained, the security guards.
They,
Yeah.
yes, they are. So then, lo and behold, she starts acting up and starts actually climbing over the chair. They can't. All right, that's it. You're gone. And they took the guy out too, but they took them out separate times. And just the exchanges of swear words and slurs going back and forth. I mean, it was just like the New York accent was flowing through and through like the Hudson River on a sunny day without any
Wow.
interruption. So I wouldn't say it's the worst thing, but I've been to so many games, people curse and swear at each other and yell at each other. I've seen it before. Nothing too crazy like that.
Yeah.
So,
I can't. Yeah, and there's nothing like out of this world or that. Like I said, that really stands out. I will say, I saw a car on fire in the MetLife Stadium parking lot before a Jets game, and if that's not a metaphor, I don't know what is.
I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Yeah. Nobody was injured. I want to be clear. No people were involved, but the car was ablaze.
Okay, well that's good that it was just the car. So
Yes.
all right, so a couple more questions. I think there's two remaining. So this one actually, I had a similar idea about this. Midline Shift asks, the power play sucks. I'm not sure how much can be improved simply by swapping personnel. How about a change of formation and system instead, maybe a spread or overload? I don't know how much that would help, but it's getting to the point where we should try declining penalties like in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about the personnel stuff where you split the top unit up totally.
Hmm.
Definitely could try some different looks. I mean, look, this is like one of those things, hockey's just like all the other sports where there's so little variation in the way teams play now. Like there's a few different 5-on-5 things that teams do in hockey, but for the most, like almost every power play looks exactly the same now. You
Hmm.
almost never see like the two defensemen on the left and right point thing anymore.
Hmm.
Everybody's trying to set up a big one timer from the top of the circle, or get a tip, rebound, or set up that, that shot from the slot with the bumper guy.
Hmm.
Those are like the three main plays that everybody's trying to run out of that umbrella formation. They could try something. I'm not a tactics or coaching expert, but they should try anything because, as you said, the power play sucks. And if it continues to suck, that will kill my optimism for sure.
Yeah, and I always say too, especially when the power play's not doing well, I always say that there should be an option like in the NFL to just decline. I always make that joke. I've
Decline
made
it.
that joke. I've made that joke for years since John Tortorella was here.
A lot
But
of people in the blue seats and elsewhere say decline it in Madison Square Garden. That's
yeah,
for sure.
right. And
Especially
I
now.
just
They didn't for a few years when the power play was good,
no,
but yeah.
right. I will say though, just to touch on David Quinn real quick, power play was probably the best it was when he was here. That was probably the best I've ever seen the Rangers power play
Yeah.
outside of when Yager, Nylander, and Straka headlined the first unit with Pruka and
Well, that was
Shanahan and all
back
that.
in the those Tom Rennie days. Yeah.
Yeah, they were. That was the power play. That was probably the best it was. Up
It was
and
really good
David
with
Quinn.
Yager. Yes. Those,
Yeah,
yeah. And Shanahan was yes, yeah. You're
and then
right.
I
Like
think
that
with
second, yeah, 06, 07. Yeah.
hmm
Yes. That you would have had Shanahan at that point.
Yeah, it was almost automatic, and I think with David Quinn, that was probably when David Quinn was here. Granted, the team wasn't the best, but I think with Quinn here, that was probably the best the power play was in a long time. And yeah, you could probably say that it got a little bit better with Laviolette, but there was definitely some regression in his second season, and kind of just alludes to why Laviolette tends to have a pretty short shelf life. But yeah, no, I agree. And the final question comes from Richter 1994, and Richter 1994 asks, why do we do it? Asking for a friend.
Oh man. Because there's nothing like Ranger hockey on a cold winter's night. Come on.
I agree.
There's nothing
I
like it.
think so. I like to say that, first of all, look, everybody knows me, knows that I'm a big baseball guy, right? Baseball will always be number one.
Hmm.
I will never refute that. But over the years, hockey has become kind of 1A, mainly in part because the Jets suck and because the Mets are still building up, but the Mets will always be number one. The Rangers are 1A. The Rangers really took off in a very different time in my life where I was growing up, becoming an adult, and they were really sort of setting the standard for what I wanted to see in a sports team to a degree. So, like you said, there's nothing like, and I associate the Rangers a lot with a lot of good memories, like
Hmm.
I'd come home from like dinner with family after church, and then I'd come home to see the 7 o'clock game, and then they washed the Winnipeg Jets 5-2 at Madison Square Garden with Sam Rosen calling 2 Ryan Callahan power play goals.
Hmm.
Or they going to hockey games around Christmas time is so much fun because they kind of involve you into sort of like the winter Christmas sort of thing. And Christmas is one of my favorite holidays. Yeah, baseball opening day, the spring, the summer, whatever. But there's something cool about like a late winter's night, sitting at the Garden, being in New York City during Christmas time, and just enjoying, hockey. And it was a little tough last year. Don't get me wrong, because I sat in Prudential Center a few times where they got absolutely drubbed. But I mean, it's still pretty fun though. Hockey's a fun sport. I love hockey as a non-traditional hockey consumer, being a Hispanic.
Hmm.
It's something that I cherish and I appreciate, and the Rangers have done a good job in fostering my curiosity as a sports fan over the last 20 something years. So why do we do it? Because it's freaking fun. Hockey is so much fun.
Yep.
Like I will suffer with this team. Look, I'm a Jets fan. I'm gonna just tell you this to any of the single ladies listening out there. I would be a great boyfriend. You know why? Because I will never turn on you. I root for the New York Jets. Okay,
Yep.
that means that means that I'm never gonna betray you. You know,
Loyalty.
loyalty. I'm a very loyal person. So
Yeah.
I just why do I do it? Because it's fun. Hockey's fun, man. It's
Yeah,
something.
and I think what you said too about like the memories and kind of like, for me it's always been a family thing. And my dad had season tickets in the 60s, old Garden, and then in the new Garden into the mid 70s. And I heard tons of stories from him and his friends. They used to go to practice, and this was when hockey was not as popular, right? The Garden wasn't
Mhm,
sold out every night. The tickets were really cheap. They let people go to practice and just pretty much rub elbows with the players. So, and my dad was a
mhm,
crazy, he was in his 20s and, wasn't really
mhm,
serious yet. So, he has these great stories. He started taking us to the Garden when we were, kind of like not young kids because he didn't have the tickets at that time. And the Rangers got good. They won the cup. The Garden kind of became pretty exclusive in the 90s between them and the Knicks. But when the Dark Ages started, one of the positive outcomes of that was that we were able to get season tickets, and we've had them since. And we sit in the first row of the blue seats, like you were alluding to earlier, JL, right above the net that they shoot at twice. My dad actually believes, and they've remodeled the Garden since, but like we are essentially in the same spot that his original season tickets were in. So he had this weird full circle moment when we sat in those seats for the first time. Like he was like,
Oh
"Oh my
wow.
god, like these are my old seats," and I'm like, "I'm back home."
Wow, that's
Um,
pretty cool.
It was really cool. And, um, look, as much as I hate that the team will not, move on from 1994, I think they lay it on a little too thick here as we're, more than 30 years removed from it. Um,
Hmm.
they do a really good job of connecting the current team to the history, to the
Hmm.
previous generations of fans. I'm a sucker for those videos that they show of those big 70s playoff moments, and
Yeah.
not just 94, but also now the 2010s playoff moments and like all that stuff. And I
Hmm.
was there for Marty St. Louis overtime goal. And,
Hmm.
I saw Henrik Lundqvist play live a bunch of times in his prime. Like what a privilege that was. Um,
Hmm.
and now with young kids, that's something I want to share with them, right? My dad shared it with me. I want to share it with them. Like, this is why we do it, right? Like, yes, it is frustrating to sit there on Tuesday night and watch them lose 3-0 to Carolina. Yes, last year was an absolute slog. Last year was torture. And look, we talked about it on this podcast. Last year was probably the worst year that this franchise has had in well over a decade, probably 2 decades
Hmm.
since the dark ages, right?
Yep.
Um, most years aren't that bad. Most years there's a lot of highlights and a lot of fun. There's some tough losses. The Rangers have pretty consistently been in the playoffs. This is not a Buffalo Sabres thing, right, guys, where we've been out of the playoffs for 12 years. Um, we've had some really exciting moments, and that's what you hold on to. Yes, I want to see them win a Stanley Cup badly. I was 9 years old when they won it in 94. I have memories of it, but I was not, you know, celebrating it the way that I would now, not appreciating it certainly the way that I would now if I was able to see them
Hmm.
win the cup. So yes, you want your team to win, but you also have to find value in the other things, right? In the successful seasons that they have had that haven't quite resulted in a championship, in the connections you make with people, right? I met my wife because we're both Ranger fans. I met, Dave and you guys from the blog because we're all Ranger fans. Like, this is a
Hmm.
real thing. It's real community. And there's not a lot of places in American life now, not to get all societal and political about it, where community exists. Sports is one of those places. Politics don't
Hmm.
matter. Um, you know, your social standing doesn't really matter. Anyone can become a hockey fan. Yes, the tickets are expensive. I know that, but everybody can turn on their TV and watch a Ranger game. We can all get
Hmm.
online and talk about the Rangers. That's why we do
That's
it.
right. That's
So
right.
good question. That was a good way to end the show,
Yes,
I
that
think.
would. Yes, I agree. Definitely. Thank you for that. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who submits questions, and thank you to the Patreon subscribers and everyone who takes the time out to read the blog. And obviously, thank you to all the contributors who contribute articles and things like that. You are all appreciated.
Absolutely. And Blue Seats After Dark is rolling. I know you and Dave work on that, JL. Great stuff.
Hmm.
Think that's an awesome, secondary audio option for folks and for Patreon subscribers. So everybody should definitely check that out. And
Hmm.
obviously, keep it locked here. We got the Live from the Blue Seats pod, our main pod every week on Fridays.
Oh,
Um,
by the way, can I say one more thing before we go?
sure.
Just have one more thought. I just want to say that if you get a chance to go to the Garden this year when they're doing their centennial celebrations, I highly suggest you do it. Obviously, I know tickets are expensive, so if you can't do it, that's perfectly fine. But I think this year in the games that I've gone to, I've been to two so far where they've celebrated, because they have the centennial nights that they're doing where they wear the centennial jersey. I think they've done a really good job. The last game I went to, which was against Minnesota, um, they did they they were celebrating one of the eras, and it might have been like the second part because the first game was, I think they were wearing the jersey. It was the beginning of the franchise they did.
Yeah. And
And
that was the opening night. Yeah.
that was opening night. So the second night was beginning of the beginning of the franchise against Minnesota, where they went from basically the start all the way to like the 30s or something like that, or the 40s.
Hmm.
So not only did they have the ice crew dressed in like the old school, old timey suspenders,
Oh,
the
wow.
hats and the button down shirts with the pants, but they had a whole like old timey what's like the Roaring Twenties types of band, like the
Oh,
orchestra
like a
ensemble.
swing band, like a
Yes, they had
big,
a
big
swing.
band. Yeah.
Yes, they had a big swing band playing music at intermission. They dressed like they were in the 20s and 30s.
Oh,
I
that's
thought
great.
that was nothing but phenomenal. The in-game presentation is wonderful. Like the video, like you talked about the videos that are talking about the history in the past. If there's one thing that Madison Square Garden always does since like 2016, 2017, because they had a bit of a lull for a couple of years, was the in-arena presentation has nothing but fantastic. And also, too, when you go to those games, they give out commemorative tickets. So yeah, I'm looking at right now is Birth of the Franchise. That was the first
Mhm.
one against Minnesota. I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting on top of my Nintendo 64. So if you get a chance to do it, I highly recommend it. The not only do the uniforms look wonderful in person, but the in-game presentation, who knows what they're going to have next, but I think they just knocked it out of the park and are going to continue knocking it out of the park with that.
Yeah, it's a great shout. No, I mean, look, the in-game and in-arena experience is phenomenal. I know, some old heads complain about the atmosphere, but the Garden consistently ranks as like the best arena to watch a hockey game in, like by away fans and by people who are kind of neutral observers. It's basically like the Garden and the Bell Center, like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's those two places. They are, and I guess to some extent, Scotiabank, where the Leafs play. Those are the cathedrals of hockey at this point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it still is a phenomenal experience, regardless of how the team is playing. It has not been great this year on the ice, obviously with the lack of goals, but I think as we've said for the last hour and 15 minutes here, we do believe that will change. No, great stuff, JL. Great way to end the show.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, thanks to everyone for listening and subscribing on the Patreon side, reading the blog. Always so good to talk to everybody, and we'll do it again next week.